Henry Drake wasn't the type to enjoy social gatherings. As a meticulous data analyst, he felt most at ease surrounded by charts and algorithms. He preferred the solitude of his office to the clamor of parties. His colleagues were amazed at how he could get totally absorbed in work, which was like a sanctuary and a cage for him. Henrik's office was full of graphs and predictive models that showed off his smarts, but they also shielded him from the emotional wounds he still carried. Years had passed since Henry had willingly gone to a social event. His reluctance was rooted in the pain of a broken engagement. Despite this, his friend Ed, who was always so persuasive and charming, had started to pester him with invitations to a party. Ed thought that a night out might help Henry loosen up and reconnect with the world beyond spreadsheets. The party was full of young professionals in their 20s and 30s, dressed in trendy, relaxed outfits, playing billiards, laughing over drinks and dancing to the music. The music was playing and people were crowded around the TV. In one corner, there was a lanky man with curly dark hair and a cheerful face, glancing nervously at a red-headed woman who was visibly intoxicated. The man shifted awkwardly and asked her, "So, this is a date now?" The redhead shrugged and replied, "Yeah, sure." He hesitated before continuing, "Can we take your car?" He then looked around the room, scanning the area. "I actually need to find Henry. Can you text me later?" The redhead raised her eyebrows. Henry Drake showed up. "I thought he'd disappeared." Smirking, she asked Ed, "Is that beer for me?" Ed groaned in frustration and waved her question away. "Have you seen Henry?" he asked Laura. "I went to grab a drink and now I've lost him," he said. Laura gestured vaguely toward a nearby room. "He was in the entertainment room about 15 minutes ago," she replied. Ed snorted. "You'd love that, wouldn't you?" Laura said, rolling her eyes. "I just wanted to have a good time," she replied. Ed turned back. To the redhead, "Send me a text later. I've got to find him." She gave an exaggerated pout but nodded. Ed pushed his way through the CR apartment and stepped into the entertainment room where a dozen guests lounged on couches watching a music video. He approached a cheerful, heavy-set man swaying in time with the beat. "Hey Grant, have you seen Henry?" Ed asked. Grant nodded and replied, "Yeah, he was here." "A minute ago." Ed asked where he'd gone. Grant shrugged and said he just got up and left, walked up the front door, and asked why. "What happened?" Grant said he had no idea. "We put on a movie and he just left." Ed demanded to know what movie. Grant answered, "The Graduate." We got to the end of the movie, and Ed's face darkened with frustration. "You showed a movie where the bride runs off with another guy. He went off with another guy, and Henry sat through that." "You're an idiot," he snapped. Henry lay on his side, gazing at Lila Carter as she slept. Her straw-colored hair stirred faintly with each breath. Though she wasn't traditionally stunning, the sunlight streaming through the window illuminated her pale skin, giving her an ethereal beauty in his eyes. Henry's life had been marked by success. He was a star athlete, an academic achiever in high school, graduating with top honors in finance and statistics. He steadily climbed the corporate ladder at a prestigious firm. Despite all of his achievements, he had never felt truly content until he met Lila. Unlike his past relationships, which had been shallow and fleeting, his connection with her was authentic and fulfilling. It was a genuine and fulfilling love story. Their love had blossomed over the course of 8 months, and on a warm summer evening, Henry proposed to Lila in a lakeside park. She said yes. In the past 8 months, they had worked tirelessly to plan their wedding. They arranged invitations, did fittings, and planned a ceremony at the church in Lee's hometown. The ceremony was set to take place in just 6 days. Over the next 6 days, as they drove along the 90 towards her childhood home, they chatted easily together, with the occasional sound of Isla typing updates to her friends and family. After a while, though, she fell quiet, her gaze fixed on the rolling countryside outside the car window. Henry was concerned, so he asked, "Is everything okay, sweetheart? Did something go wrong with the caterer?" Lila shook her head and smiled faintly. "No, nothing like that. I was just thinking about some of the baggage I left behind at home." Henry frowned. "Baggage?" What kind of baggage? He asked after a moment of hesitation. She replied, It's just some old friends and family. They're not exactly thrilled about me getting married. Married? Henry's brow furrowed. I thought your family liked me. We got along great when they visited, he said. My parents adore you, she reassured him, but a few friends and distant relatives think I should be with someone else. Henry tensed up. Who? She sighed deeply. It's about Eric, she admitted quietly. Henry's jaw clenched. His voice was calm. Eric, that's ancient history. Why is it even coming up? I just wanted to flag that people like Brittany might say things or make it awkward. Henry raised an eyebrow. Is she one of your bridesmaids? Why would you ask someone who doesn't support our marriage to stand in the wedding? He asked incredulously. Layla's my oldest friend. I was in her wedding and I didn't want to leave her out. Henry exhaled slowly, then softened his voice. Leah, I'm in this for us as long as we stick together. Nobody else's opinion matters. Let them think what they want. I'll handle it. She leaned against his shoulder, and they continued the drive as they pulled into the driveway of her childhood home, a cozy 2-bedroom-story farmhouse on the edge of town. Lee's mum ran out to greet them with open arms. Leah, my beautiful bride-to-be, she exclaimed, hugging her tightly before turning to Henry. Henry, you're as handsome as ever, she said, giving him a warm hug and ushering them inside. Layla's dad greeted them quietly, offering a firm handshake and a welcoming nod over a hearty dinner of pork chops and mashed potatoes. Wedding details dominated the conversation when the subject of seating came up. Lila's mother hesitated. Is your dad still flying in? She asked. On Thursday, she asked. Is he going to be here for the rehearsal dinner tonight? Yeah, he'll be here in time, he replied. Her face fell. Oh, Henry, I'm so sorry. The country club had a mix-up and we had to move the dinner to Wednesday. That's okay. My dad avoids. He'll be fine on Saturday, he said. Public gatherings are his thing, so he'll be fine. Layla's mum let out a long sigh. Her shoulders relaxed as the tension eased. Are you sure? She asked again. I don't want anyone feeling left out. I'm positive, he replied. I'm sure he'll be fine. Henry replied with a warm smile. But what party is on Thursday? I don't remember anything being planned. Oh, is that Lee's mom? Well, isn't your best man, Ed, organizing something, a bachelor party? Oh, right, I think so. I asked him to keep it low-key since most of my friends aren't arriving until Saturday, just a small get-together. Henry turned to Lila and her mum. I guess Lee's having a bachelorette party too. Her mum nodded eagerly. Yes, Brittany is organizing it. She's so excited. Lots of Lee's high school friends will be there, she said with obvious enthusiasm. Henry smiled at her energy, but he couldn't help noticing Lee's uneasy expression. He felt a flicker of discomfort himself by the time the rehearsal dinner came around. Henry was already counting the hours until it was over. He'd had 2 days to get used to feeling like a spectacle for Lee's old friends. The real trouble was Brittany, an assertive woman who took control of every conversation, steering wedding plans and social chatter. She'd also roped in Eric, Lila's ex-boyfriend. Eric, a smooth-talking country guy, became the focal point of countless anecdotes from Lila's past. One particular story about Eric taking Lila to prom in the sight of a horse-drawn carriage made Henry feel uneasy. Lila blushed with embarrassment, while Eric basked in the attention, leaving Henry feeling uneasy. The other women at the table praised the memory, and Henry felt increasingly isolated. He looked longingly at Lila's parents, seated at another table, wishing he had joined them instead. I'm sorry, I think they got a bit carried away, the voice said softly. Henry turned to see a plump woman with curly brown hair and a crooked smile speaking to him. She nodded towards Brittany and said, I'm sorry, she knows everyone here so well and probably didn't mean to leave you out. Henry felt a small wave of relief and smiled. Yeah, I get it, it's just hard. I don't know the stories and my mind's on the wedding. She smiled back. Of course, I'm Valerie Caldwell. We met at the mall yesterday. Henry nodded. Yes, I remember. he said politely as they chatted. Henry heard his name called from across the table. He turned toward Brittany, who was visibly annoyed. Sorry, what did you say? He asked Brittany. I asked if you could tell us about your work. Leah thought. You prefer to explain it yourself. Henry was caught off guard. Henry stammered. I analyze and compile economic models to help firms make investment decisions. Blank stares greeted him. Eric joked, drawing some laughs. Henry glanced at Lila, who gave him an encouraging smile. He cleared his throat and tried again. I help companies figure out what products to launch, or stocks to invest in by looking at market trends. This got a few polite nods, but the conversation grew awkwardly quiet. Realizing he needed to break the silence, Henry turned to Eric. So Eric, Lila tells me you work at a Ford dealership. Do you enjoy the job? Eric's demeanor stiffened. Yeah, it's a good job. I like it. Henry said, so you're in sales? Eric replied, No, I'm not a salesman, I'm one of the managers. The table fell silent and Henry realized he had misstepped. I'm sorry, I didn't mean anything by it, he said quickly. Eric shrugged and muttered, It's fine. The tension lingered. Later on, the couple went over what had happened that evening. Henry asked, leaning against the bedpost. Lila thought for a moment. Eric's got some issues. It's not your fault he got so wound up, she explained. Henry frowned. So you're saying it's my fault I wasn't trying? I just wanted to make conversation. Layla stroked his cheek. It's not your fault. Eric's always been the big man in town, but things didn't go the way he planned after high school. He didn't get the scholarship, the job, or the girl he wanted. Henry interrupted his frustration. Clear, Lila? Lila raised her eyebrows. Henry, please don't get mad. You don't have to compete for me. Henry sighed. It's hard not to feel like I do. It's driving me crazy when Eric showed up with that girl. It felt like he was trying to make you jealous, and it looked like it worked. He hasn't gotten over you, has he? Eric and I were together for a long time. We were in high school together and then for a couple of years after graduation. We even planned to get married, but it didn't work out. He didn't want to go to college or get a white-collar job, and I did. He got jealous and started spying on me, and it ended with a big fight. She took off the ring and told him to leave her alone. Henry nodded and that was it. We talked a bit after that, but it wasn't the same. She moved on, met you, and here we are. Eric's just an old friend now. It's you and me. Henry, she hugged him tightly, but as Lila drifted off to sleep, Henry lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The next day, Henry, his father Simon and Ed sat together at the only bar in town that served food. Simon, stout and weathered, leaned back in his chair listening as Henry recounted the rehearsal dinner. What a freak, Simon said loudly, reaching for his beer. He sounds like a real piece of work, Ed chuckled as he took a bite. Of his burger, Henry shrugged. Maybe, but you didn't miss much. Dad, yeah, I guess so. Simon said, finishing his fries. I'd probably embarrass myself anyway, so it's just as well. Henry began to object, but Simon waved him off. It's okay, Henry. This is more my speed. Henry sipped his beer and nodded. Yeah, I'm okay with that too, Dad. Better than last night. Simon gave his son a sideways glance. Is this really all you wanted for your bachelor party? A few hours in a sports bar with your old man and Ed? No dancing girls? Simon nodded. I get it. He took another bite of his burger. The three men spent another hour talking, joking, and watching a soccer game before calling it a night. As Henry drove Simon to his hotel, the older man fidgeted in the passenger seat. Finally, he broke the silence. Silence. The big day is on Saturday. Son, are you ready? Henry glanced at his father briefly. I'm ready, Dad. I can't wait to marry Lila and start our family. I barely saw you after that, then you had to live with me after her accident. Simon's voice broke, and Henry saw him wipe his eyes. I'm happy for you, son. Happy you found someone you truly love, he said sincerely. Simon turned to his son, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry for how things went after your mom passed. I could barely take care of myself, let alone you, but I loved having you around, watching you work so hard and succeed. You deserve to marry a great woman, and I'm proud of you, son. I'm really proud of you." Henry was unable to hold back his tears as he rested a hand on his father's shoulder. They sat quietly for a moment, the bond between them unspoken but strong. Before long, Simon stepped out and headed to his room. Brittany Mitchell's parents owned the grandest home in Newbury, a sprawling mansion. That evening, the house was filled with laughter as a dozen women lounged in the living room, sharing wine and stories. Layla, the bride-to-be, was at the center of the excitement, opening gifts and joining in the laughter. The evening took a turn when a slightly drunk suggestion to model some of the Lila was initially hesitant when she was given lingerie gifts, but she eventually gave in and chose the least revealing baby doll outfit she could find. She took her time putting it on and nervously stepped into the hallway, where the women erupted into cheers and applause that echoed like the uproar of a rowdy crowd. Although she was embarrassed, Lila managed a few shy poses, her cheeks burning as the group egged her on. Brittany, who was clearly tipsy, yelled, "Show us another one!" Lila let them know she had other ideas and politely shook her head, retreating back to the bedroom amidst groans of disappointment. She was disappointed as she changed back into her clothes. There was a knock at the front door, followed by Brittany's shrill laughter. 3 men entered, carrying bottles of champagne and vodka. Brittany ushered them in, leading Aaron Smith and Tom Jenkins to reunite with their girlfriends. The third man, Eric Daniels, casually asked Brittany. Lila said he had something for her, but Brittany replied that she was changing and would be out soon with a cheeky grin. Eric began organizing the group to sing the school fight song for her. Leah heard the commotion and assumed it was another game, so she decided to join in the fun and burst into the room giggling. She was so shocked that she froze in her tracks. The women pointed at the men, but it was too late. Aaron and Tom looked stunned, while Eric clapped and grinned. Leah ran back to the bedroom, where she stayed for half an hour until Brittany convinced her to come out. By then, most of the guests had left, leaving just a handful of women sipping their drinks. Eric was still lounging on the couch and waved casually as Lila entered, reluctantly. She sat beside him, covering her face with her hands. "It was so humiliating," she groaned. Eric chuckled and patted her back, saying, "If it makes you feel better, I'll never forget it either. I wish I had a camera." He teased Layla, who glared at him but couldn't help laughing. "Someone should have warned me," she muttered. Eric shrugged. "Surprises are my secret weapon. Look how much I miss out on without them," he said with a grin. They reminisce about old times until Lila decides to head home. Brittany tried to give her a lift, but Eric said he'd drive her instead. On the way, they chatted about mutual friends and past events. However, a few blocks from Lila's house, Eric suddenly pulled over near a hedge. "What are we doing here?" Lila asked. "I have something for you," Eric said, pulling. Lila shook her head. "Eric, I'm getting married in 2 days. This isn't right." She opened the box and gasped. Inside was a delicate opal pendant on a gold chain. "I've been searching for this for years," she whispered. "I drained the pond 2 years ago and found it in the mud." Eric explained softly, "I found it in the mud 2 years ago." Lila's hands trembled as she held the necklace. "Why did you wait until now?" she asked. "I just wanted to give it to you before the wedding," he said earnestly. She tried to fasten the chain, but her shaking fingers fumbled. "Let me," Eric offered, his voice barely above a whisper as he secured the pendant. Lila stared at it, tears welling up in her eyes. "I love you," Eric confessed. "No, you don't," she said firmly, pulling away. "I'm getting married," Eric said. "I can't do this," she said, and stumbled out of the car and ran towards her house without looking back. 12 hours later, Lila was standing on a stool in her living room wearing her wedding dress as her mother adjusted the hem. "You're quiet today, are you all right?" her mother asked. Leah sighed. "Yes, Mom, I'm fine." "You don't seem fine," her mother replied. "Is everything okay with Henry?" her mother asked Leah. Lee's eyes widened in panic. Of course, why would he be upset? Did he say something? She asked quickly. No, but maybe he's annoyed. We made him stay somewhere else last night. He can sleep here if it's an issue, her mom suggested. No, Mom. Henry's cool with it. He's a good guy, she said quietly. Mrs. Carter's eyes narrowed as she noticed the necklace. What's that? Did Henry give it to you? Layla hesitated before answering. No, Eric did. It's the pendant he gave me for my 16th birthday. He found it after I lost it in the pond. Lila's mother stepped back and put her hands on her hips. You're accepting gifts from an old boyfriend right before your wedding. Lila mirrored her mother's stance, defensively. It's different, Mom. He found it and gave it back to me last night. A good man doesn't let an old flame ruin what you have, Layla sighed. Why do you hate Eric so much? Everyone loves him except you, her mother replied. I like Eric, but he doesn't share your dreams. He's charming, but lacks the ambition to build a stable life. I want you to be happy. If you'd chosen Eric, I'd have supported you, but I'm glad you picked Henry. He'll take care of you and give you the life you want, she explained gently. Leah nodded, though her fingers lingered on the pendant. I know, Mom. Henry's wonderful, and I love him. It's just that being home and seeing Eric again has stirred up old feelings. It's hard to bury the past, she admitted. I understand, her mom said with a sympathetic smile. But tomorrow you're marrying a great man who deserves your full heart. Don't forget that night Lila lay awake for hours, restless. A faint sound drifted into her room. It was music at first, barely audible, but it grew louder. Curious, she got up and peed outside on the lawn. 5 musicians played. She thought it was a prank. Lila laughed. She opened her window to tell them to go away, but then she froze. She was sitting on the porch roof, and Eric was humming along with a big grin on his face. Her father's voice called out from downstairs. Leah, what's all that noise? It's just some guys playing music. Dad, I'll chase them off, she called back. It's past midnight. I'll handle it, he said, getting up. He was panicked. Lila hissed at Eric. Hide with no place to go. Eric gestured helplessly. Quick, come here, she said, motioning him inside. Eric climbed through the window, grinning. Hey, Leah Fancy, she said, seeing him there. You're trying to stay out of Sternley's way, but you're going to get me in trouble. I know, he replied, smiling. But you've got an angel face like that, and you'll get out of it. The pendant around your neck. You're wearing it. Yes, it's a lovely gesture. Thank you. Is that all we are, Eric? Friends? Eric's eyes met hers. I love you, Layla. I love you too. When Lila woke up, Eric was beside her, snoring quietly. Her mother's voice came through the door. Lila! It's time to get up, Panic said, and as Layla slapped Eric awake and pressed a hand over his mouth, motioning frantically toward the door, Leah said, Did you hear me? Yes, Mom. I'll be right out, Lila replied, trying to sound calm. I'll set your dress on your bed, Mrs. Carter offered, placing her hand on the doorknob. Wait, Mom! Leah shouted, wrapping Layla through on her nightgown and yelled. Don't come in! I've got really bad gas. Oh, don't be silly, her mother replied, starting to open the door. Layla threw herself against the door, desperate. Mom, it's awful. I'll come downstairs to get dressed. She shot a glare at Eric, who was fumbling for his pants. Leave now, she hissed. Leah kept talking about the toxic atmosphere until she was sure Eric was gone. Then she opened the door with a nervous smile and said, Okay, Mom, you can come in, but I warned you. Mrs. Carter stepped inside, sniffing the air suspiciously. It smells fine in here, she said, sounding puzzled. Laughed nervously. I think it's my wedding nerves. Maybe, her mother replied, still unconvinced. Later, Lila sat in her wedding dress, staring out the window. Mrs. Carter entered the room holding a pair of jeans and a wallet. Leah, I found these under your bed. Do you want to talk? Lee's composure broke, and she burst into tears. Oh, Mom, what am I going to do? Her mother took her hands gently. Leah, who do you want? That's all that matters. Lee's voice trembled. I feel torn. Everything with Henry feels right, but I can't let go of Eric. Mrs. Carter wiped a tear from her daughter's cheek. No matter what you have, my love and support, but you have to decide. In the groom's room, Henry's excitement turned to worry when he saw Lila's distressed face. Lila, what's wrong? He asked, stepping forward. Henry, we need to talk, she said, her voice breaking. Her mother gently guided Ed out of the room, leaving the two of them alone. Sweetheart, tell me what's wrong, Henry said, his concern deepening. With tears in her eyes, Leah spoke quietly. I've got some bad news. I can't marry you. I love you, but I can't do this. Henry tried to reassure her. If you're having doubts, we can wait. There's no rush. Lila shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, Henry. I can't marry you. Ever. It would be a mistake. I'm so sorry. And left the room, tripping over her dress on the way out. Simon Drake was in the church foyer when chaos broke out. He saw Mrs. Carter speaking seriously to Ed as nearby guests whispered angrily, spreading gossip through the crowd. Ed's conversation with Mrs. Carter ended abruptly. His face was red with frustration as he marched back to the groom's room. Simon followed him to the room, where he found Ed shaking his head in disgust. It's off, he muttered. Wait, what? That can't be, Simon replied, following him back to the foyer. His doubts disappeared when Henry emerged, disheveled and tearful. Oh my God, son, what happened? Simon asked, horrified. Henry could only shake his head, unable to speak. Suddenly Eric burst into the church, half-dressed, and approached a woman asking urgently where Lila was. She pointed toward the reception hall and Eric rushed off, enraged. Simon followed and found Eric kneeling before Isla, who was still in her wedding dress, smiling through her tears. Simon couldn't believe what he was seeing. His son's heart was broken because of this. He shouted at the crowd, who turned to watch. His Leah began crying again. Eric turned to face Simon, but Mr. Carter quickly stepped between them. Is it true? Simon's words were cut off. Mr. Carter punched him square in the face. Simon staggered back, wiping blood from his lip. His expression turned brutal as he advanced on Mr. Carter. But then Henry's voice stopped him. Dad, no, it's not worth it, he said firmly. His tone was exhausted. Simon froze. His anger dissolved into calm. Ed led him away, but Henry lingered, looking at Lila with a mixture of pain and resignation. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out the wedding ring and tossed it toward her. It clinked as it hit the tile floor and landed. Goodbye, Layla, he said bitterly before walking out. His steps were heavy, like a condemned man. Henry sat hunched over in his small apartment, staring blankly out the window. He stood, stretched, and walked past the empty spaces where memories of her used to linger. 1,000 days, he muttered, glancing at the unmade bed, evidence of another sleepless night. He stripped off his workout clothes, showered, shaved, and put on his usual dark suit and tie. 1,000 damn days, he repeated, heading to his car. The drive brought back memories of that terrible day. He walked from the church to the car, supported by his father and Ed. His mind was numb from the shock. His father had driven, offering words of comfort, but Henry had barely heard him. He pulled into the parking garage of Prairie Tower and took the elevator to the 42nd floor in his corner office. He greeted the janitors and settled into his desk, switching on his computer. The office had become a sanctuary, a place where numbers and graphs drown out. Henry had gone on 5 dates with Ed, all of which ended badly. He wasn't ready for romance, so he retreated into his work and avoided human interaction. But he couldn't live as a recluse forever. That night, instead of heading home, he attended a party. The house was nearly a mansion, with cars lining the driveway and street. Henry parked a block away and texted Ed, who met him at the door. He was nervous but smiling. Ed showed him inside to stop him leaving. The house was full of people having fun, watching a baseball game, playing volleyball, eating barbecue, and drinking beer. Ed introduced Henry to friends and new faces. Henry was surprised to find he enjoyed the conversations and even felt confident talking to the women there while playing pool with Ed in the recreation room. Henry wandered off when Ed left to get a beer. He eventually ended up in the media room where he ran into Buddy Crawford, an old classmate. "Hey, Henry. Long time, no see. Want some chips? There's barbecue outside too." Buddy: "No, thanks. I'm fine." Henry: "What are you watching?" Buddy: "We just saw the Cubs lose in extra innings." Henry: "Oh. What are you watching now?" Buddy: "It's a movie. When it's done, we'll hook up the Xbox. Join us." Henry: "Sure." He nodded vaguely, standing behind the crowded couch as the movie played. His chest tightened when he recognized the graduate, watching the final scenes where Benjamin disrupts Elle's wedding. And they run away together, which made him pale and breathless. The group sprawled across the floor and couches laughed and shouted, with Elaine along with the iconic scene. Henry felt nauseous and bent over clutching his lap. A concerned woman touched his arm and asked gently if he was okay. Henry shook his head and left without a word. Ed knocked hesitantly on Henry's apartment door, waiting a moment before knocking louder. Henry answered, looking tired and unkempt, dressed in old shorts and a faded t-shirt. "Hey Ed, what's up?" he asked, stepping aside to let him in before heading to the living room. Ed hesitated but followed. "Sorry to barge in, man. I just wanted to check on you after the party last week. I'm really sorry about the whole movie thing." "It wasn't your fault," Henry replied, slumping onto the couch. Ed perched on the edge of the couch, leaning forward. "I was worried about you. We should talk," he said earnestly. "You need to move forward," Henry said, his exhaustion clear in his voice. Ed's tone softened. "Henry, I know you've been through a rough patch, but you've got to start living your life again." Henry's frustration came out easily, and he said, "I was betrayed by the one person I trusted most. How do you just move on from that? Do you even know what that feels like?" He was really upset. He raised his hands to stay calm. "I don't know what it's like to be betrayed by someone I trust, but as your friend, I can tell you that you can get through this. It'll take time and courage, but you can do it." Henry let out a bitter laugh. "So now I'm a coward because I got dumped? I'm saying your life is in your hands. You can stay isolated or you can start something new. It's up to you." Henry rubbed his face. His anger was giving way to weariness. "I don't even know where to start," he admitted, his voice low. Ed smirked and pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I might have an answer for that," he said, handing it to Henry, who opened it cautiously. "What is this?" "It's a list of women who would love to go out with you," Ed replied. "Just give one of them a call." To do better, Ed encouraged him. "I don't think I can," Henry muttered, his voice tinged with doubt. Ed smiled knowingly and pulled out his phone. "I figured you'd say that, so I have backup," he said, pressing a button and saying, "Simon, doctor," voice came through the speaker. "Henry, I know you've been through hell with all that. I understand why you're jaded, but you need to grab life by the horns and move on. You're too smart and talented to waste away like this. Ed has a list of great women you can meet. You don't need to get serious, just enjoy yourself for once. You've got too much ahead of you to stay in this self." Henry sat on the couch, staring at the list on the coffee table. Ed waited for a response before finally breaking the silence. "Well, Henry, what do you think?" Henry blinked, snapping out of his daydream. "I think I need to get my act together. I should ask one of these girls out and start living." Henry nodded. "Yeah," he said. Ed raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Wait, did you just say you're going to call one of them?" "That's what I said," Henry replied more confidently. "My dad's right." "You're right. I need to move forward." Ed grinned. "All right then." Without overthinking it, Henry started at the top of the list. The first woman was tall and graceful, a former ballerina with straight brown hair. She worked as a buyer for a clothing store and enjoyed tennis. They had dinner at an Italian restaurant and went to see a play. It was a polite evening, but it felt a bit stilted. They ended it with an awkward kiss on the cheek and apologies on both sides. The next morning, Henry called the second name on his list. She was a short, perky redhead who worked at a veterinary clinic and loved dancing and skating. Their first date involved sandwiches at a cafe, a lively dance club, and coffee at a diner. The conversation flowed easily. They touched on light topics, but neither brought up their personal romantic histories. It was likely at Ed's suggestion that they went out 4 more times over the next 2 months, but despite the ease between them, there was no real spark. Henry let the connection fade naturally. The third woman was a free spirit with light brown hair, laughing eyes, and tan skin. She worked as a research assistant and loved motorcycles, loud music, and smoking pot. Their date involved a rock concert, after which she invited him back to her apartment. The heavy smell of smoke and the constant Grateful Dead music made Henry uncomfortable, and he left. On his way back home, he washed his clothes twice and took a shower, wondering if secondhand smoke could make him fail a drug test. Girl number 4 resembled Marilyn Monroe with short platinum blonde hair. She was a saleswoman who lived at home and had few interests. He managed to hold the conversation during the dinner was a bit of a drag, but when she invited him in for a drink, he kindly declined. The next few dates were with women who were fun but nothing special. They had good conversations and went on second, third, and even fourth dates, but Henry never felt a real connection. He was worried that the love he'd shared with Lila had been a one-time thing. In the course of his lifetime, he met Selah Rawson. Selah was a 28-year-old University of Ohio graduate with a marketing degree working in advertising. She had shoulder-length ash blonde hair and a heart-shaped face. Selah was recommended by her brother, who worked with Ed. Initially, she declined Henry's call, but after reconsidering, she agreed to meet him. Their first date was at a cozy downtown cafe. The conversation started awkwardly, but soon grew lighter and more spontaneous. They shared stories and laughed. Henry was running late getting back to the office, but he couldn't resist calling her the next afternoon to set up another date for the following night. They went to an upscale steakhouse, but they had planned to see a movie afterwards. They missed it because they got so engrossed in their conversation. Dessert stretched into hours. When the waiter finally asked them to leave, they moved to a nearby bar to continue talking. They discussed everything from clothing preferences to travel dreams to their favorite sports teams. One day, during a light-hearted conversation about pop culture, the topic turned to The Parent Trap, which Henry mentioned. Lindsay Lohan prompted Selah to groan dramatically. "God, Lindsay Lohan! I hate her." "Why?" Henry asked. "It's not her. It's a Disney remake of The Parent Trap." "I know, but you hate her because of a movie." "Exactly," Selah said, clearly irritated. "No, it's not okay. I really hated that movie." Curious, Henry pressed. "How can a Disney movie be that bad?" Selah leaned forward with a mock glare. "You're going to make me explain, aren't you?" "Yes," Henry said, grinning. She sighed. "The movie is about twins trying to reunite their parents by playing horrible tricks. Everyone loved the movie because the parents got back together, but I relate to the fiancé. She just wanted to marry the guy she loved, and these kids sabotaged her. The movie paints her as a gold digger, but she wasn't." Henry tilted his head thoughtfully. "Why do you care so much about that?" Silk's voice softened. "You don't know, do you?" Henry admitted, sounding confused. Selah hesitated, then said, "I thought Ed or my brother told you about Paul." "Paul," Henry said, nodding. "Right, things were serious. He was older, divorced with a teenage daughter, Ava. She wanted her parents to get back together. The divorce was rough on her," Selah said, taking a sip of her drink. "When Paul and I got serious, Ava tried to sabotage our relationship." She had a bitterness in her voice. "She pulled a parent trap on me. She played pranks to make me look bad." Henry leaned forward, intrigued. "Okay, now you have to tell me about the pranks." Selah laughed, shaking her head. "Buckle up. she said, setting down her glass. The first prank happened when I was meeting his business associates. Ava handed me my perfume as we were leaving, but she'd added something horrible to it. I didn't realize it until Paul leaned in to smell my neck and gagged. I had to scrub. I went into the restroom, but I still felt humiliated. Henry suppressed a laugh and said, "That's awful." He tried to sound sympathetic, but Seela replied sarcastically, "Oh, please, feel sympathy." She didn't stop there. She washed my underwear in the same stuff, put garlic capsules in my vitamins, and spiked my spritzer. I told Paul stayed quiet, but I always wondered if he thought I just smelled bad. Henry leaned closer and joked, "Well, I'm not picking up anything now." Seela rolled her eyes and faked a frown before continuing. Another time, she smeared fly pheromones on me before a picnic with friends. Within minutes I was swarmed by flies and begged Paul to talk to her, but he brushed it off. It was almost the end of us. I couldn't trust her, and the paranoia was exhausting. Henry's eyes reflected shock. What finally happened? The last straw was a dinner party with Paul's parents and his clients. Ava slipped a sedative. By the end of dinner, I'd probably had 8 of something in my wine. I was slurring my words and passed out on my plate. Paul had to carry me to bed, which was pretty embarrassing. Henry said, "Nope, Paul was embarrassed by my behavior and got defensive when I blamed Ava. That fight was the end of our relationship. I realized I didn't have his support and couldn't deal with her on my own." Seela leaned back, shaking her head. "More like Twisted Disney," she said. "That's my story," Henry retorted. "Yours?" Seela said, smiling despite herself. "How about yours?" Henry leaned back, his voice. "Mine's more like a runaway bride." Seela's curiosity was piqued. "Did she leave you at the last minute?" "No, she left me for an old flame at the wedding. I was in my tux, ready to go, and she walked in, said it was over, and left." His voice carried the sting of lingering hurt. "That's awful. My dad nearly caused a scene, called her a witch, and started yelling at the guests. It was chaos." Henry admitted, shaking his head at the memory. "What did you do?" Seela asked gently. "I just walked away like a zombie. It was a mess. Honestly, this is the first time I've been able to laugh about it. It feels so far away now," Henry said, his expression softening. "Time does that. Time helps." "Sure, but mostly it's because of you," Henry said warmly. They left the bar holding hands, and Henry opened the car door. As they sat, Seela said, "I had a great time tonight. Maybe you'd like to spend more time together. We could go to my place, it's nearby." Seela turned to stare out the window, and Henry's heart sank. "I'm sorry," he added quickly. "I didn't mean to embarrass you. We haven't known each other that long." Seela stepped inside, looking around before turning to him with a tense expression. "Henry," she said softly, "just take me to the bedroom." Henry swallowed hard, nodding. Later that night, Henry woke up to find Seela lying beside him, smiling in the dim light. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi yourself," Henry replied. "Can't sleep?" "I woke up a while ago and started thinking," Seela replied. "About what? I'm not sure. What I'm saying is, a girl shouldn't always reveal her plans." "I agree," Henry replied. "But what are your plans?" "What plans? I'm going to make you mine," she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Henry froze for a moment, then smiled. "You've made a good start," he murmured, gazing into her eyes. Their relationship blossomed into a whirlwind romance full of new experiences. They quickly got engaged and started planning a perfect wedding without drama or resentment for a while. Henry's worries about his past seemed to disappear. Everything felt right until Seela casually mentioned that Paul wanted to attend their wedding and some pre-wedding events. "He just wants to wish me well," she said. I told him it was okay, but Henry felt uneasy. He tried to rationalize it, but Seela was just being polite. When Paul arrived, it was clear he still had feelings for her. He frequently pulled Seela aside for private conversations, touched her arm too often, and acted as if they were still a couple. Selah never firmly told him to stop, which frustrated Henry. Less than 10 months after meeting Selah, Henry found himself at their rehearsal dinner, gripped by a familiar sense. Paul was charming and confident, and he had the guests eating out of the palm of his hand, especially Selah, who couldn't take her eyes off him. Henry barely touched his food, feeling increasingly anxious and isolated. Finally, as he rubbed his temples, muttering in frustration, Selah noticed. "Are you okay? You look upset." Henry glared at her and hissed angrily. "Damn it, Selah. If you're going to destroy me, why not just use a knife?" Selah's eyes widened. "What's wrong?" Henry came on. "Come on, Selah. I've been here before. You invited your ex too. You've been rehearsing without asking me. You've got secrets, private conversations, and you can't stop looking at him. I know how this ends. Maybe we should switch places," Henry said bitterly. Selah leaned in, shaking her head vigorously. "No, Henry. I didn't invite him. He invited himself. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd be mad." Mad? About what? A last-minute trip? Henry demanded, his voice rising. "Stop," Selah said firmly, her tone becoming resolute as her panic faded. "This isn't what you think." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Then explain." He took a moment to collect himself before saying, "Just wait a couple of minutes. You'll see." At that moment, one of the women Paul had been chatting with exclaimed, "What's that on your teeth? Is that juice?" Selah smiled triumphantly at Henry. "Maybe you won't have to wait after all," she said smugly. "We're not done yet," Selah replied, watching as Paul frantically dabbed at his face with a napkin in the blue dye, only making it worse. His confident demeanor crumbled as his expression turned from irritation to panic as he realized he was stuck to the chair. He grabbed a pocket knife and began sawing at his pants to free himself. The polite murmurs of the crowd turned into outright laughter as he finally stood with a loud tearing sound, his clothes in shambles, his face flushed. Paul rushed to he made his way to the restroom, his appearance now resembling that of a corporate clown. "That's cruel and incredibly funny," Henry said, turning to Selah, who was watching the spectacle with smug amusement. "Yes, it was," she replied nonchalantly, especially the last part. "I didn't see that coming," Henry said, leaning closer and lowering his voice conspiratorially. "What do you mean you didn't see it coming? Didn't you plan this?" "It wasn't just me," Selah admitted with a grin. "I had a partner in crime," she said, grinning back at him. Nodding towards the far end of the table, Henry saw his father Simon grinning ear to ear. Simon raised his wine glass in a toast, looking utterly pleased with himself. "Oh my God!" Henry laughed. "What have I gotten myself into?" "I don't know," Selah teased, slipping her arm around his. "What did you get yourself into, Heaven?" Henry replied with a smirk. "Heaven, I guess," Selah replied, parking her beat-up car under a shady tree. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and cursed the broken air conditioner. She stepped out and walked up the driveway. She passed the duplex, noting a tiny patch of brown grass and a sprinkler lying in pieces. She unlocked the screen door and entered the living room, where a fan was blowing warm air on her husband, who was napping on the couch. She slammed the door shut, startling Eric, who was still groggy and rubbing his disheveled hair. "What time is it?" he asked. 30, Eric, she replied, standing near the fan. "Did you interview for any jobs today?" Eric sat up, stretching lazily. "How was I supposed to go to interviews when you had the truck?" Layla planted her hands on her hips, raising an eyebrow. "You could have looked online, filled out forms, made calls. It's been 6 months and we're out of money. Have you done anything?" Eric sighed. "Yeah, I checked online, but it's all crap." "Maybe working a crappy job for a while won't kill you, Leah," she suggested. Her tone was sharp, but not nagging, which wouldn't hurt either. Eric snapped. Lee's face fell, and she blinked rapidly, covering her mouth. Eric's expression softened, and he stood to hug her. "I'm sorry, Lila. I didn't mean it," he whispered. "I just don't want to settle for a job that doesn't pay enough." He pulled back and looked her in the eyes. Stick with me. Okay? There's a new dealership opening on the west side. I'll be fine. Just give me a chance. Give me some space and time, Layla. She sighed, nodding reluctantly. Okay, Eric. I'm just stressed. My accounting job barely covers anything, and we have no savings. We need a second income. I know, Layla. I'll get it soon. Don't worry. They exchanged half smiles before Lila walked over to a small alcove with a desk and a computer. She turned it on and started paying bills. After a few minutes, curiosity got the better of her, and she checked the browsing history. One lonely job search was there. She found Eric's browsing history, which was buried under a pile of sports pages and YouTube videos. He was eating a stale slice of pizza from a box on the coffee table. Want some? He offered. Leah shook her head no. I'm going out with the girls tonight. Remember? Eric nodded, chewing. Don't spend too much money, he told her. Leah smiled warmly, and Eric grinned back before focusing on his pizza. Lila watched him for a moment, seeing him not as a man but as a boy trapped. In an adult's body, her gaze drifted to a wooden box on the shelf. She opened it and pulled out an opal pendant, holding it with a dreamy expression. The smile faded as she heard Eric swearing at his video game. She frowned, bit her lip, and lifted a piece of felt-covered cardboard in the box to reveal a beautiful gold ring with a diamond. She admired it briefly before putting it back and turning to the computer. She opened a file of photos saved over a decade. The photos showed Henry at business events, on his honeymoon in Hawaii, and with his family in front of a gorgeous home. Her phone rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. Hello? She answered. Birthday girl, are you ready for the bachelorette party? Valerie Caldwell's cheerful voice chirped through the line. Lila hesitated. Yeah, Valerie, she replied. I don't know. Our budget is tight. No excuses, Valerie interrupted. It's your birthday present from all of us. You're not paying a dime. The whole gang will be there, except Brittany. Why can't Brittany come? Layla asked. She's picked up a second job because her husband's back in rehab. Valerie explained. Layla said, I didn't know. Yeah, it sucks, but tonight's about you. Don't be late or we'll miss the start of the show. Valerie warned. The show starts at 7, so we need time to eat first, Valerie replied enthusiastically. Layla bit her lip. Is that the only reason? Valerie said there was an option for a Tarantino Western, but that was about it. Leah snorted and said she should watch the Western. Valerie laughed and said she didn't know Leah liked Westerns. Leela glanced at Eric, who was engrossed in his video game amidst the mess, then back at the picture of Henry and his perfect family. Her voice was quiet and tinged with regret. It's not that I like Westerns, Valerie said. It's that I ain't really into romantic comedy.